The following is a special presentation of WILS News. Listener discretion is advised.
It was like flying into the London Blitz. Lock and load.
I am a nervous, trigger-happy National Guardsman.
Looters will not escape.
It was on.
Despite the fact that both Mayor Kavanaugh and Governor Romney had notified Washington in the early morning hours of July 24th, it would be another 24 hours before the 101st and 82nd Airborne would hit the streets of Detroit. The delay and what precipitated it would be one of the most contentious events of the entire week. Chuck Harmon explains things from Romney's point of view.
There was about a 10-hour debate between Washington and George over the federal troops. And frankly, in retrospect later on, and as people settled in on what had happened, there has never been since then a question in my mind but that Lyndon Johnson tried to play this thing to his political benefit and to George Romney's detriment. At that point, Romney was still considered the possibility of being the top Republican runner in the 68 election. And everything I've read, and I include some stuff, a couple biographies I read, suggests that there was an effort to embarrass Romney, and that included trying to almost get him to say uncle as a condition of sending the troops in.
In his haste to get federal troops on the ground, Governor Romney nearly made a colossal technical blunder that would have made the economic aftermath of the riot even worse. Chuck Harmon.
And he had made it quite clear to Ramsey Clark that he was prepared to do almost anything necessary to get the troops in. But let me tell you what became a real glitch. Ramsey Clark told the governor at some point early on that before they could send the troops in, he would have to declare that the matter was out of control and that an insurrection existed. And he was almost ready to do that. And Bob Danhoff got him aside between phone calls, and he said, I got to tell you something right now. Every fire insurance policy has a clause in that says if the burning occurs during insurrection, there'll be no fire insurance coverage. And at that point, the governor determined he would not use that word. And we found later on that's exactly what would have happened. Had he declared an insurrection, all the people who had lost their buildings, their homes, or their businesses would have lost their insurance coverage. It would have been worse than Katrina. And that's terrible as it is. And so they dallied around on that until he just said, I will not do that.
By 10 a.m. on the 24th, after 6 hours of political and telegram tag, President Lyndon Johnson was still unwilling to fully commit federal troops to Detroit, which would, in his mind, bail out a political opponent. So instead of taking the bull by the horns, the always politically calculating Texans sent a team of advisors, led by recently retired Deputy Defense Secretary Cyrus Vance, to Detroit just after noon to personally assess the situation. 2 hours later, the airlift of 2 airborne brigades from Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell to Selfridge Air Force Base, 30 minutes from downtown, began. Before President Johnson sent his exploratory team to Detroit, his mind was on one thing. Roger Wilkins, who was part of the White House team dispatched to Detroit, explains.
He started telling us, and occasionally he would be on the phone to Fort Bragg, to the general in charge of the 82nd Airborne. And one thing he kept saying, I don't want bullets in those guns. I don't want our troops to have bullets in those guns. And he went on, and he just got himself all worked up. And he said, I don't want anybody to say that my troops shot a pregnant net. And he looked at me, and his face went red, and then he finished his sentence without finishing that word.
Wilkins also agreed with Chuck Harmon that presidential politics played a role in the decision to deploy federal troops.
The president essentially engaged in a three-way conversation. Governor Romney was on the phone, general in charge. So he's talking to the general on the one hand and asking him, is he ready? How soon can he get there? And he and Governor Romney were continued to spar about it. And when he wasn't talking to those people, he was talking to us. And one of the things I remember very clearly is that I was the only black person in the room. But I think all of us in the room came to the conclusion that we needed this Army presence out there sooner rather than later. But it is true that there was sparring between the governor and the president. It was politics.
Cyrus Vance, in a 1980s interview which became part of the award-winning Eyes on the Prize PBS documentary, explained his view of the situation upon arriving in Detroit.
The National Guard had been very spotty. There had been much too much indiscriminate shooting. They had shot out the street lights, which is the worst thing you can do in a situation like that, because that makes it even more likely that the law enforcement people are going to be shot at. It creates a fear in the community. It creates fear, really, in the enforcement officials as well, so that it was not going well when we arrived. Roger
Wilkins also recalled for us the chaotic scene he witnessed upon his arrival in Detroit.
Deputy Attorney General Warren Christopher called the Attorney General. The Attorney General said, "Well, what's it like out there?" And Christopher said, "Well, it's a great town if you're a fire buff."
More delays in federal deployment resulted from a Vance car tour of the riot areas around 5 p.m. Monday. Unfortunately, the tour came at a time when the streets were relatively quiet, giving Vance the improper impression that things were subsiding. More political posturing occurred 3 hours later during a joint press conference when Vance continued to insist that federal troops were not needed. While Democratic Mayor Kavanaugh openly disagreed, GOP Governor Romney inexplicably sided with Vance. That infuriated Detroit's black leadership, who quickly made Romney change his tune. By 8:30, the governor was back on the side of immediate deployment. Bill Sarin gave us his impression of Governor Romney's performance during this critical time.
You know, he didn't know what the hell he was doing. I liked him as a guy, nice man, but he didn't know what the Christ he was doing. I think essentially he got bypassed because I think they sat around for a day or two waiting for the governor to do something. He sent the guard in, but then they went right to the White House, and then Kavanaugh, being a Democrat and sort of a favorite of Lyndon Johnson, that's when the federal troops came in.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire.
As darkness fell over the city Monday night, Sarin was taking a break from his exhaustive coverage of the event with his girlfriend in a downtown park. He told us what he saw as he looked out over Detroit's skyline.
I remember sitting in Lafayette Park with my girlfriend, and the town was on goddamn fire. I'm telling you, both sides of town. Up Michigan Avenue, up Gratiot, it was on fire. The skies were red.
4 days of rioting, looting, and arson rocked the city of Detroit in the worst outbreak of urban racial violence this year. Entire blocks of homes become infernos. Governor Romney declares a state of emergency, requests federal troops and 5,000 paratroopers reinforce the National Guard, state and city police. The city's industry and business are severely affected, and a tight curfew is ordered in the motor center. A besieged city of guerrilla warfare. Sniper groups use day and night hit-and-run tactics before tanks move in to curb their window and rooftop barrage. Wreckage is everywhere. Civil rights leaders make a joint condemnation of the violence and call for an end to the rioting. President Johnson, using firm words, urges the nation's citizens to support the maintenance of law and order.
I know that the vast majority of Negroes and whites are shocked and are outraged by them. Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights. They are criminal conduct. Your president calls upon all of our people in all of our cities to join in a determined program to maintain law and order, to condemn and to combat lawlessness in all of its forms, and firmly to show by word and by deed that riots, looting, and public disorder will just not be tolerated.
I didn't mean to take up all your sweet time. I'll give it right back to you. Or one of these days.
When President Johnson finally gave the order to dispatch troops from Selfridge into Detroit, the one final thing he wanted to do was to make sure everyone knew that GOP presidential candidate Romney couldn't control his own state. In a 7-minute speech before the nation just before midnight on the 24th, Johnson mentioned 6 times that he had committed federal troops because Romney couldn't control the situation. Chuck Harmon recalls that speech and Romney's response.
We went back to our own office, and he shut the door, and I can't recall what he said, but he was absolutely furious. But it was clear to everybody what had happened.
By the time the political wrangling had ended, the Monday sun had set on the streets of Detroit. However, its rioters, snipers, firebombers, and renegade law enforcers were just getting started. We revisit a hellacious Tuesday when Motor City burning continues.